Okay, recording in progress. Well, to all those here and all those who will be watching this series later, this is the second half of the Animist Arts Mutations Funkadelic remix of Sandtalk Book Club. And we did two over in Jeremy's podcast land, and those were epic. And we're gonna release the all four videos together at the end so people can have them, on YouTube for free forever. I think that's the case. But here we are, number three, and I really just want to sort of I'm coming in with a bit of just the curiosity that I know that Jeremy took a buttload of notes, and I really want to give Jeremy some time to sort of like highlight some of that note taking and some of those questions that they were asking as they read the book. So that's what I'm sort of coming in with. Yeah, hello, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Do you want me to jump in there? And thank
You
you.
can, or
Thank you.
you
It's good
can
to be
just
here.
say you can just say hello, or if you can
Yeah.
jump in, yeah, totally.
Yeah, sure.
No worries.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel kind of as I was just saying to you, stretched a bit thin because of this writing process I've been in, working on the introduction to a mutations anthology. And it's been kind of weird writing this introduction before my book, which is my primary creative work at the moment. So I feel kind of split. But in that splitting, I think there's a sort of vulnerability, a transparency that I've been able to cultivate. It's been a very uncomfortable transparency, but as I'm coming back to Sandtalk, I feel this sense of this inquiry has been sticking with me, which is, and I don't think Tyson necessarily is giving answers in this regard, right? But when we cultivate transparency in the present, when we are able to lean into the present, right? As difficult as that can be at times, what there is a sense in which that wisdom, that intergenerational wisdom of becoming an ancestor, of turning, let's say, a few generations into the future and becoming, in a sense, young again, and then learning from our descendants, that nonlinearity of history becomes accessible. And so I guess for me, it's are we sufficiently, how to exactly frame this? Are we, in the context of everything we're going through right now, the so-called metamodern condition of this unbearable awkwardness of becoming local again and contextualized and connected to the land that speaks to us, right? And the spirits that are present and the beings that are present amongst us, right? To what degree are we just simply not sufficiently present and transparent to that, to begin that creative process, so there's a kind of a sense of like, all right, let's just lean into this. Like, it's terrifying and it's jumping into the water, right? It's jumping into the deep end and I can't see the bottom, but I know I can do that. Or when I say I mean um, collectively, humanity right now. The sense of dissociation seems illusory when it comes to this presence, this ability to just make that leap and see what happens and learn from that process. So that's where I am. It's not really a question. It's like, this is where we are right now. And there's so much abstruseness about that, like, oh, we are in the postmodern condition and we're so disconnected from, like, yes, 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 but also we are capable, or perhaps we are capable of becoming more present in the present, in our bodies.
Right.
What happens when we begin that work,
Yeah.
that activity? So anyway, that's sort of where I am with Tyson and with this question. And then the I feel there's a subtle sense of distantiation, right? We want to kind of go like, no, we're too broken, we're too dislocated, we don't know what we're doing. It's like, yeah, all that is true, but also like you can't hide from this, right? Like there's that Rilke line with the torso of Apollo. There's no place that doesn't see you. So what do we do with that? Anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's where I am.
I mean, I think it's a perfect kind of sense in the sense that, like, it is not a rational question with a rational answer, but it is an embodied inquiry with an embodied sort of discovery process, like a discovery, an exploratory embodiment. Like clearly there's been 30 million years of humans or something like that. Like clearly humans have gone through many really intense experiences, right? Like there is something to there's something to our capacity for entering into the unknown and continuing that doesn't require us to know it already, right? Like there's just a kind of like, well, oh, we're in dialogue, we're in communication, we're in constant inquiry, and there's a feedback process. And I do think it's funny that there's something addictive about paralysis, right? There's something really addictive about paralysis because it's whatever it is, what it is, but it gets us to this kind of I need, I need Tyson to hold my hand, or I need indigenous elders to hold my hand, but then we're not giving them the authority or the power to do anything anyway, right? So it's a double bind, and Nora talks a lot about this kind of stuff, right? These kind of linguistic but also perceptual double binds where we're both helpless and masters of our domain at the same time, which is really kind of silly, right?
Yeah. And I don't know if we want to veer into the great stage theory debate, which has
I
been,
think it's part of the now. I do think
yeah.
it's part of this.
Hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
want to say anything about your current? Because I've watched I've watched both interviews. There was a panel that you did with Nora and yeah, I'm gonna mess up the names. So there was a panel you did, and then you hosted an interview with that Nora did with somebody else on your
Hmm.
your site.
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, like they're throwing down the gauntlet and saying, "Hey, you know what? There's some really gross history here, and have we done enough to be aware of those histories? And are they still in the present? Are they still ghosts? I mean, Nora literally used that word. Do we want these ghosts in our theories? Do we want to carry them forward? Um, so there's that, and I think that's important. On the other, not even on the other hand, it's like the urgency or the desire I feel is always kind of orthogonal. Like, yes, I know that's bad, but there's this other very interesting question, which is okay, if we take indigenous complexity and we recognize that obviously history is not linear, what do we do with that? How do we, what does the territory look like if it's not a straight line? And I'm more interested in how we unravel that or lean into that, articulate it, narrativize it.
Mhm.
Um, Stories that are not straight lines, but circles or spirals or nonlinear enfoldments that kind of are difficult to spatialize, right? Calabi-Yaos, et cetera. So for me, like it almost highlighted okay, yes, true, decolonization, but then also like if we're going to really be present with decolonization, then that means that there's a kind of ontological flooding that takes place here. And what do we do with that? Like, how do we creatively respond to that?
Mhm.
I guess that's where I'm at here, right? Like just a sense of creative, mutational urgency, this desire to be present for that kind of work.
Yeah.
And while acknowledging that the other side of that is there's so much that has not even been said, that we're not even really there yet. There's so much that hasn't even dawned on just in terms of the integral community. Nora's tweet or hot take, right? Which was for the first time they're really kind of going, oh, maybe there's some weird, icky history here that I need to be aware of. So that's happening at the same time. So
there are,
Anyway, yeah.
it seems to me that there are just biological resistances and cultural resistances to intensities. Whether those intensities are the unveiling or the revealing of like really nasty eugenics history, or whether it's the uncomfortability of recognizing that we're in an like kind of an ecological insanity moment where we're totally almost removed from our relationship with the earth in such a way that we're kind of crazy, you know. There are intensities to even to those concepts that I just said, and I think that it's natural that a human system would resist those intensities because they wouldn't feel so safe. But also, on the other hand, it's like safety isn't the arbiter of this kind of relationalness or this relational sanity, you know? And I think that Tyson's talking about it pretty bluntly, and I think that Nora knows Tyson, and you know, like there's a bit of like directness and bluntness that is starting to become like more forward or more for into the front of the stage of the stage theory, and it's very similar to sort of like the racialized trope of like angry black people. It's like they're not angry, they're just very direct. And they also have every reason to be angry. And none of that should be a barrier to the receptivity. And yet we're using it as that, as a kind of, well, these are the norms and these are the ways we've done it. And, you know, like there's science, and it's all kind of deflection and resistance kind of pattern. And I do think that like we need to reckon with that. We need to reckon with bluntness and directness and honesty. And if we don't do it with each other, nature is just going to do it. Like hurricanes, earthquakes, you know, like it's just like heat waves, fires. The directness of that will be the intensity that we cannot resist. Yeah. So I want to open it up a bit to other people and then come back to you, Jeremy, with maybe some highlighted, some notes on the book, like some, maybe you can read a few passages, because I know that I'm really interested in some of the to be continued that we had in the previous talks, but just want to open it up for people. If you want to sort of say where Sandtalk is wrestling with you, where you are wrestling with Sandtalk, with any of the concepts, ideas, or words of Tyson currently in the now. Yeah, just raise your hand. There's a little hand signal called in the reactions button on the bottom, and you can just put your hand up, and then you can unmute. But yeah, just let's get a second to sort of hear from other folks. Like a 3 to 5 minute shares. Yeah, if you have something. Yeah, Renee. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I tend to not necessarily follow a narrative of a book anyway. So there are details that I pick out. And something that's coming to me and that sits with me a lot with this book is the necessity that he stresses through his own sort of the way he does things, behaviors. And he says it specifically of listening to people's stories that are nothing like yours, specifically ones that you disagree with, to find these holistic, I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm going to use it, holistic truths that can sort of shed light on things. And even the other person that may not even have, it might have nothing to do with what they're saying, but through the way that they use their words and some things that they're saying about themselves, you can come to a more whole understanding about the world, and that, our connection with each other is based on those sorts of things, and that we need those sorts of things. So that's something that's sitting with me a lot about the book right now.
Yeah, like the book is sort of wrapped in this context of yarning, like a yarning technology that is definitely not modern Western communication or storytelling, but is a kind of older way, maybe even some of our sort of immigrant, European ancestors talked this way, like a kind of way of talking that is embedded in an ecosystem and embedded in a sort of farming or labor, some kind of, salt of the earth way of talking, to each other about everything at the same time, right? Because you're just in a community together. And so this kind of yarning technology is definitely like if I want to be silly right now, I could say that Tyson could make a whole crap boatload of money teaching yarning courses online, right? Like how to yarn. Like people would buy that, people would eat that up, right? Because it's another like tell me how to be kind of thing. But it is a kind of like how do we relearn this way of listening to each other, especially if we're going to say things that are unrefined, not smooth, not gentle, right? More direct and possibly inflaming. It's an interesting question for me as a facilitator, for sure. I feel like I'm more on the direct and blunt side of things, and I know there are people who are even more so, and it can turn a lot of people off, and also it can sort of bring up a lot of ghosts, like what Nora did, right? Like Nora did this very direct thing, and like all these ghosts came rushing in to sort of like counteract the kind of statement she was making, and it's both beautiful and potentially dangerous and upsetting, and we have to come to terms with that. And I don't have any answers necessarily, other than the body of work that I'm sort of doing with Larissa and things like that. So yeah, for sure. Keith and then David. Keith was like 0.2 seconds before David.
Thanks. So yeah, there's some, I can't like pinpoint one thing, because throughout the entire book, I basically had to read one chapter at a time, because every single chapter blew my mind. And I would just have to sit there and sort of marinate in that lesson, that chapter. And the biggest thing, I've got to read the book again, obviously, but the biggest thing that came out of the whole thing for me is how much I don't know, and how much my upbringing and my cultural knowledge base is lacking, and how many assumptions I was raised with were not only lacking, but just out and out lies. Lies about how long we've lived on this earth, lies about how intelligent our ancestors were, lies about how effective verbal communication can be, lies about the superiority, the infinite superiority of written language over verbal language. And the other major thing I'm sitting with out of it is I have a deep desire to be fully embodied and be in the present. And I've been working on that for a while. And I have a deep desire to be in and of and on the land. And I'm also scared shitless to take the major steps that would allow that, to, give up financial security, or I don't even know how to go there, other than, in a couple of years I might be able to retire, which is sounding better and better to me all the time, because that will give me more freedom to do maybe some things that, while I'm still working to put food on my table, I don't know how to take those steps, because I can cook, and I've got a little garden that I started last year, and I can do a little bit of things, but there's such a large gap between what I can do, what I know how to do, and what I would need to do to actually be self-sufficient with the land, that if I walked out there, I'd be dead in a month. So those are the main things I'm sitting with right now.
Right. Totally. Thanks. Yeah. It's real. Like I'm not a rewilder kind of person. Like I've had very little access to outdoor space, good hiking shoes, like the whole 9 yards, this ridiculous web of needs. And then also just the reality of like when you're disconnected from a community that has skills that are distributed amongst their network, right? Like we're disconnected from that web of knowledge base. So like how do we do the things in a way that Tyson's talking about, knowing that we can't actually recreate the knowledge network that Tyson has access to, and nor should we really, like it's not really even like an option. It's like, well, that's the Aboriginal people, they have a knowledge base, and that's awesome, and we should listen to them, but we can't necessarily replicate it. And so we are in this bit of paralysis of like, I want to take this journey, but I don't even like how do we even take 3 steps, 1 step, and I think we're all asking this question as the ecosystem's pressure on us becomes more and more intense. And I don't think there are any easy solutions, but I do think that we need to keep in dialogue about like that we're trying to at least, scratch the surface of something like that. Scratch the surface of something that maybe barely resembles like being with the land in a good way. Barely, maybe, right? Like, and also maybe not even at all good enough, And yet, still in that direction there's something honorable about trying. For sure. David, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Hey. Part that was really important to me in this book, maybe I'll read a couple of sentences if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, that's great.
Most lasting cultural innovations occur through the demotic, the practices and forms that evolve through the daily lives and interactions of people and place in an organic sequence of adaptation. When these processes are unimpeded by arbitrary controls and designs of elevated individuals, they emerge in ways that mirror the patterns of creation. And I feel like I just had to stop there because I think, growing up the way I did and being socialized the way we are, we tend to grab something like that and be like, great, that's so true. And I'm going to write an essay about it, and I'm going to teach a class about it and do an art project and, get a tattoo about it. And the truth is, like, I don't even think we can hear that paragraph, which means like, you need to stop and sit down with the people around you and create something together. And in order to do that, you actually need to walk back from all this stuff that you run away with, and ask, like, what would it even mean to sit down together and see each other and have a conversation that wasn't dominated by any one person. And so I'm so curious about that right now, about what practices are available to us that would resemble that right now, in our lives. So I'm curious of, in all of your lives, what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a good, like a hanging inquiry for sure. Um, Jeremy, Larissa, Shantae, anything bubbling up for you all?
I could bring a little something. Actually, really, first I just want to greet the spirit of that deep awkwardness that Jeremy had mentioned earlier, and that everyone I think is talking to, which is this place where that place of paralysis, or this place of like, man, I read these words and like I know it's the thing, I know it's the thing, I know it's the thing, and I have ancestral knowledge that's telling me it's the thing, it's the thing, it's the thing, because like somewhere in here is that way of being or some version of it from our own people, everywhere. And it's just a relaxing in the presence of that bridge and that gap of not knowing how the transitions are going to happen. And at the same time, I actually think, in my opinion, we know plenty. We know plenty. We know enough to practice a lot. We know enough to practice a lot. I think we want to keep like predicting even further into the future or something, maybe because it's fun, maybe because it feels like we need some kind of stimulation, like we want to be moving into the more complex arenas. But I think we know enough, even in what you're just talking about, David, like what it would take to even just sit down with a few people, like your housemates, and be like, what if we talked to this house like it was alive, and each room could reflect the pattern of creation to us, and we don't know what that means, but we're going to ask all the corners in the room, and we're going to ask all the objects, and like, holy shit. I mean, if you practice that your whole life and you didn't do much else, I know that we would be contributing to the state shift that would be required in order for the next people who come to be able to maybe hear something a little deeper, a little more subtle, a little more complex. Maybe there's a little bit less noise, so that they can, they can actually walk away from their jobs. They can actually move into the land. They can actually create a network of people that know how to address the wildfires, and it's not that complicated. They're not so entrenched in the like the grid square life of feeling like you have no options, and you're just kind of trying to have some pleasure inside of many hours of like toiling. I don't know, but I do think we know plenty already. I think we have already been hearing the clues, and who knows how long it will actually take. I don't know. I like to tell people like, hey, just plan on practicing this one thing for your whole life, and recognize that it is perfect and enough and beautiful, and don't worry about it. Because I think we need that to relax something in our system in order to just keep showing up to it. Right? And like sending that prayer generations down, that maybe we're just quiet, like cleaning things out and quieting things enough with enough people and enough houses and enough neighborhoods across the internet in order to be able to hear the next thing that comes, and who knows what it is, I don't know. So that's bubbling up for me.
Thanks, Larissa. I feel affirmed with what you were just saying about, maybe it is enough that we just work to become present. And as my buddy JF Martel, the way he articulated it, treat every it as a thou in relationship. That practice, you may not know how to survive if the system goes down, and figure out your water and your food. I mean, who knows that? But you can at least live in relationship with the world. The world is as alive and in relation with you. I mean, that's the starting place. at the very least. And maybe the next, as Larissa was saying, maybe the next generation will figure out the food situations and what grows and what doesn't and what those particular contexts are. But we really have to begin with presence and relationship. You know, what is alive in the present in relation with us? How do we engage in the world that way? I know there is this sense of awkwardness in that, and tension, and am I doing it right? And do I really know what I'm doing? And then there's also this capacity that I do feel is within us, that is a capacity of trust. It is a kind of, okay, I'm going to do this anyway, as if, you know, as if there is a relationship, and as if my house is a mirror of the complex web of relations in the cosmos. Just do it. Just see what happens, you know, and continue to show up for that. I don't know what else we can do. Because if it becomes like, how do I actually survive? What's subsistence like? What are we going to do about food scarcity? Yes, all those things are important, and we are thinking about those in the macro. But if they're from this sort of productivity, efficiency, kind of just I don't even know, just the conceptual abstract sense, then it's not even, it's a false start. It's not even where we need to be beginning. So relationship, aliveness, presence.
Right. Yeah, the beginning is always, I think, much more humble, simple, you know, because it is like, okay, you're breathing. Like, there is a starting place that is not grand, and the product of it is not this sort of like checklist, you know, success gamification of like, now I absolutely know how to do this thing, this kind of skill, you know, this skill addiction thing that moderns have, right? Of like wanting to know everything before they experience it, right? Like we find comfort in explaining things rather than experiencing things, and then in hindsight, you know, like reflecting in hindsight, right? Like reflecting on our patterns. We, you know, there is that strange paradox of that nonlinearity that goes on with like, if we're trying to outwit death as a kind of meta goal here, like how do we outwit global warming? How do we outwit, you know, capitalism that's destroying us? I think that it doesn't work because there is no outwitting such a force that is inevitable. And I've been listening to some of Tyson's more recent interviews, and I really recommend them because, you know, there's a lot of dancing around Westernism and dancing with Westernism, and sort of like, you know, jabbing, playfully jabbing with sort of like the Western trope, the European sort of white supremacist tropes that we all are sort of saturated in. But when Tyson drops into his felt sense of connection with his ancestral body, which is like, we are the stars and the stars are us, and we are the land and the land is us, and the land is the stars, and we're all doing this together, and the dead are reborn as descendants. You know, like it's just a coherence. There's no grasping when he's in that felt sense place, and the jabbing actually kind of stops, which is what I find interesting, is that there's like the Tyson that jabs because he has to live in Sydney and he doesn't want to, or wherever he is, Melbourne, or, you know, he's in a place that requires him to protect himself in whatever way he finds enjoyable. And then there's this other place he can go in his consciousness, which is just immediately available to him. And I think it's immediately available to all of us, but there's a little bit of work that we have to do to stabilize it. Where he's no longer there, I can hear him no longer wasting energy on figuring things out. And this is what's really interesting to me, is like in that ancestral mind, the figuring out mind that's panicked, like I need to figure it out or else I'm going to die or be abandoned or something, that figuring out mind doesn't seem to exist, because it's actually just there's a connection, and in that connection the figuring out is sort of like a potential or a latency in the field, and so it's not, you don't have to search for it because you know it's like, oh yeah, it's in the web, so like it'll happen. We just need to like figure it out together, yarn a bit to the left, yarn a bit to the right. Somebody knows somebody who knows a mechanic, and that the car gets fixed, you know? This kind of thing. But I do think that like my work in particular is about sort of like finding that shift. And Jeremy, I would love to speak like how would you explain what I'm saying in sort of Gebserian sort of language, that shift between like the state that needs to figure things out before they do them, and then the state that's like, you're like figuring things out is not even the same. It's like that panic is gone. The edge of that anxiety is not leading the show anymore.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways it's just kind of an ego transparency. Like you're going to do that in your brain, the little part of your brain's going to do that. Your mind is going to want to grab this, but it's better not to. And it's better to continue to come back and relax and open your hand and relax your mind and become present again and notice the relationships that are going on and the processes that are going on. They'll say more to you about what needs to be done, if anything can be done, than you would be able to do trying to figure out a whole plan to survive. You have a better chance anyway. I mean, that's the logical reason. But then the other reason is just, it's not a reason. It's just the intelligence is relational, and you can't be present if you are opposing the world in an attempt to self-preserve. You can't. You have to put a limb out there in relationship. You have to allow yourself to kind of fall. If it's forward, then fall forward to make that step. So yeah, I mean, it's leaning into that gravity of process and relation. And I don't know if that's exactly Gebserian, but that's how I'm hearing what you're saying. And then also, Geps are talking about this, purposive, goal-oriented thinking and strategizing, surrendering to what does he call it? The surrendering to the spiritual process. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, I think it means somewhere along the lines of what we're discussing. And then the other thing is maybe it's this possibility that, I mean, let's just call it a possibility for folks who may not want to exactly engage it, but the future is present and has a shaping force and a guiding force in relationship with us as much as our ancestors do. What does it mean to really live in that kind of present? Like to really try to be there. What opens up? I don't know. I'm just saying in terms of like, it's interesting where that process might go. And then also, even in our kind of humility of an awkwardness and like the meta modern tension of like, I don't know how to be local. I don't know how to be place-based. I don't know how, okay, that's fine. That's good. Actually acknowledge that and still do it. Still try to be present. There's a sense of equanimity here as a practice that we have to continuously return to again and again. That is, I don't want to exactly use the word. This is the word Shinzen Young uses with purifying. It's not, it's opening, it's creative, it's engaging in the spiritual process itself, the relationship with the spiritual process itself. Yeah, I don't know. That to me feels more aligned, at least with the way Gebser talks about integrality and presence and the absolutely impossible conundrum of being a modern and being severed from the past and haunted by the ghosts of the past. And then also not having the future either, because you don't have time anymore. You just have the series of disconnected presents, right? Rushing forward, fixing things, self-preserving. There's a nothing, there's an emptiness in that. And yet we're not just that. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And then there's just this momentums in certain patterns. And, you know, I find a lot of my own process of like daily living and healing might seem to some like I'm doing nothing or I'm just lazy or slowing down a lot. But what I'm actually doing is actually catching the runaway train, you know, and being like, so what's happening right now? Oh, right, there's an upward motion going this way that wants to do something over there, and that's connected to this kind of fear I have about something. You know, like you can kind of draw or sketch a constellation of energies in the self or the whatever, and then ask yourself, is that how, like, well, what is that how I'm like when I feel good? And then the answer is, you know, inevitably, well, no, because I'm doing this to feel good. But then you can, in that moment, bring it back to like, well, what's the sketch of energy when I feel better? And it usually looks way different, sort of as a kind of constellation or network, you know, feeling state, right? And then I'm just trying to figure out how to make decisions from that second place. Because I think part of the freak out that modern people have, and I think it's, you know, fair to say many people, is you introduce them to this sort of animistic, kind of weird, awesome, yet very unknowable relational model, and they actually don't know how to make decisions, so they freak out. Because if you take away someone's decision making capacity, there's paralysis. And so then it becomes about like, how do we remember how to make decisions from places of relationality and relaxation, right? Like a kind of like what you're talking about, a kind of I'm putting a limb out for connection, but I'm also relaxed in that, so that when that connection happens, I might actually be able to receive it in some way that was not just, oh, I got a connection, now I'll put it in my pocket and keep going, you know, like collecting relationships or something, you know. Yeah, so the practical is where I start to hone down into like the practical actions of a modern, because I'm a modern, you know, the practical actions of a modern who's actively trying to repattern their way of making decisions. And the kind of hall of mirrors and the kind of nightmare show that could actually be for a few years, right? Like it actually could take a while to sort of this purifying process might be like scrubbing off many layers of dead skin, and it's like really hurts, right? It's like really like, I'm purifying, my skin is burning, you know. That might be the kind of the spiritual process, the dark night of the soul, the kind of being torn open. But it only feels torn open from the place that we're coming from, I think. You know, so contextually, right? It's not like a universal. It might just be a kind of contextual, like, well, you know, if you never go barefoot, then the first time you go barefoot on the earth, you might like, it might feel bad. It might hurt, you know, you might be like, ow, 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 ow. Because you've been, you know, your feet are really soft, you know, like it's like, that's what it feels like to me. If anyone else wants to chime in or read passages from the book, that's totally available. I think we have enough people. Yeah, still raise your hand because I think it's easy if multiple people do it at the same time. Yeah. Also, Jeremy, if you want to read something from the book that's like really sticking with you, or notes that you're still like really chewing on, I think that would be cool.
I have something I could go into, but I want to give people a chance. I can come back later.
Either way. Lursa, do you want to go? Then I have a passage I could talk about, but yeah.
Sure. Sure. I wanted to like bring some of my version in around what y'all have been talking about this, which as far as I remember, this conversation kind of got rolling. Well, who knows when it started, really. But Dara was talking about observing Tyson in this state of interconnectivity and coherence and nested reality and everything communicating to each other and everything being wrapped in this like unifying kind of song-like quality. And I wanted to speak a little bit more to that and how I've seen that show up in my life and in my practice. And Dara was just highlighting some of, actually, Dara, I think you and I had that conversation last night about the practical application of how to repattern or how to change behavior and what you have to do in order to like start to basically create those little rivulets off the main river that's really well worn, right? It has all this momentum and all this rushing potential because it's so well lubricated, and then you gotta like make these little rivulets off to the side to make a new choice and start to actually change behavior. And there is a very there's a process there of fiddling with like your ways of making choice and what choices are accessible to you at any given time. And this state that we're talking about, this, and that Jeremy was also mentioning, this the all presence the whole time, the future and the present and the past all being together and all things being together. You can feel this. There is a feeling, there is a direct feeling that you can have with it at any time, at any moment. And to me, that feeling has a very distinct rhythmic and musical, artistic, held quality to it. So anytime you find yourself in a state where you've lost time or you're very absorbed in some kind of creative process, this is really good. And this is the thing to center on. This is the thing to really make a teacher for you. So in that state, it's like you might get a chance to also recognize how you might not have to make any decisions. You might just be following that place of having to figure something out or like making a choice won't feel at all the same way. Just like Dara was talking about, there's a way of being so connected to the different like pulses and rhythms that are happening that you just know, and you just allow yourself to follow that next thing. And so personal disclosure, a few years ago, I had a big like 6-month experience, altered state experience. And if anyone had taken me to like a traditional mental health clinic, they probably would have called it mania or psychosis. But luckily I had enough grounding capacity that I wasn't going all the way in that direction. But I really I really am appreciative of this medicine and this grace that came in that time where, for whatever reason, I was just able to be in this whole time rhythmic, dance-like, deeply held quality of reality. I couldn't read like the same way. Like everything about my physiology was really, really different. And I came up with all these practices to help me stay inside of it. And it all had to do with, well, I'm still kind of digesting it, but I mostly in here just want to share that it was, if I could, there's a kind of like air thickening and melting that's possible as an organism, almost like you're slowly sinking yourself in a deep, deep lake or a deep ocean, and there's a bigger song underneath the water that is talking to you and guiding you and communicates directly with you and helps you feel like, oh, and now I want to do this, and now my voice is feeling more free, and I can do this. These are my options. And there's a following. There's a very easy following, and a not deciding, other than maybe deciding initially to listen. Yeah, so I wanted to bring that in.
Yeah. And I think, we can talk for a very long time about sort of like the way that we have to repattern if we're following and listening rather than individually choosing, and sort of like the interplay or the ratio of those things, and what happens when multiple people are listening in the same space, and what happens when sometimes those listenings are seemingly at odds and create a kind of ghost drama, And I think that's also part of what we fear, because we know it's true because we've all experienced it. Like person A is living their best truth and person B is living their best truth. And somehow in the listening, there is like a contact or a friction or a conflict that arises. And I think that the thing that Tyson has that we either don't have or we have very little of are elders and people whose lives are dedicated to staying in a kind of coherency that would then be able to sort of deal with conflicts as they arise in a way that is non-abandoned and is like redemptive. And that, like Tyson talks about in the book, when people do something wrong or they go against the limits of their relationships and they harm somebody or something, and they do something that's out of ethics, then the community, decides upon a punishment. And that punishment also contains with it the redemption, which is to say, if you do this, if you actually enter into this ritual of being punished and doing whatever it is that your the elders or the community has chosen for you to do, then the community's job at that point is to literally let go of the grudge so that that person can actually become whole part of the community again, and not just like, oh, that's an ex-con. You know what I mean? Like there's this way in which Westernism doesn't let you let go of that. And it's weird too. It's very strange because it requires this kind of loving, connected eldership that helps people remember that our lives are kind of futile and temporary and silly, and that the larger body is actually what is meaningful. Like the feeling of being connected to the larger body is actually maybe like the point of living, right? Rather than an individuation of an individual's life. And so, it gets to that place where conflict is somehow remediated through the capacity of the culture to let go of something. And that's also something I think Westernism has a really hard time with, like letting go of things, right? So it like loops back in this very strange, and it's very spiritual. Like we're talking about justice and conflict, but like it's extremely a spiritual task to do this without dissociating and without sort of becoming naive about it. Like there isn't a naivete. I want to shoot it back to Jeremy, but I was meditating earlier, and I sort of had like a little dream image of some weird child creature, and they said something like, "I'm less naive, but I'm more innocent." It's like, yeah, that's what I want. Like, I want to be less naive, but more innocent, like this freshness, like the innocence of like this freshness, right? But there's no naivety in there, so it's not like you're you know that the crocodile can eat you. You know what I mean? Like this, you know that people can turn on you. You know that violence happens, right? But there's more innocence, not less. It's like, I got to integrate that for a few months. Jeremy, I would love for you to read and to talk about and to sort of just chew on some things for the next little while, if you're up for it.
Sure. Yeah. There's as you were describing that, that's so interesting. I was just talking to my wife Nat about some interesting dreams I had with what I perceived as fairy folk who looked very old and very childlike at the same time. So I'm just thinking about that conversation in relation to this one, and the way in which I think Western narratives, or really civilizational narratives, have tended to ironically pull off Ken Wilber's pre-trans fallacy on themselves, in the sense of really mistaking and conflating naivety and innocence. Like really presuming there's naivety in indigenous thinking and indigenous complexity, and not really getting that is not the case, right? So just a kind of inversal or reversal that has come up in the recent stage theory debate. But yeah, no, I think there's, in terms of sharing, I come back to the last few pages, right? When Tyson's talking about having 4 questions. What can we know? What do we do? How do we know it? And how do we work with that? And the answers being, what we can know is determined by our obligations and relationships to people, ancestors, land, law, and creation. What we know is that the role of custodial species is to sustain creation, which is formed from complexity and connections. The way we know this is through our cultural metaphors. The way we work with this knowledge is by positioning, sharing, and adapting our cultural metaphors. And what's interesting is Tyson's talking about this sort of reversal that happens in Western culture, where you begin with direction. And on 247, Tyson's talking about that. Invert that process, and you'll have something approximating an appropriate way of coming to indigenous knowledge and working towards sustainable solutions. The first step of respect is aligned with values and protocols of introduction, setting rules and boundaries. This is the work of your spirit, your gut. I'm just thinking in the context of Gebser, right? And then the structures, the magic, the gut. The second step, connect, is about establishing strong relationships and routines of exchange that are equal for all involved. Your way of being is your way of relating, because all things only exist in relationship to other things. Just that line in of itself, like just that has been ringing and resounding for me. Your way of being is your way of relating. So like ontology, like how do you relate to the world, right? This is the constant question, at least in the sort of a Gebserian approach. How are we in relationship with the world? Your way of being is your way of relating, because all things only exist in relationship to other things. This is the work of your heart. The third step, reflect, is about thinking as part of the group and collectively establishing a shared body of knowledge to inform what you will do. This is the work of the head. The final step, direct, is about acting on that shared knowledge in ways that are negotiated by all. This is the work of the hands. Respect, connect, reflect, direct, in that order. And I think you're right with Tyson, that there's such clarity and coherence when Tyson's embodying that wisdom and that ancestry. Everything in creation is sentient and carries knowledge. Therefore, everything is deserving of our respect, even narcissists. But that sense of everything in creation is sentient. How do we practice this in our daily lives? And then again, for folks who are familiar with the structures, you could see them in what Tyson is expressing here about knowledge, about the heart, about the gut, head, heart, gut. But I love the emphasis on direction and the hands. It's something I was writing about today and struggling with, actually, because I've been trapped indoors in rainy season and summer and the lockdown and Florida being Florida, and not being able to think and direct myself with my hands to go out and do things. I mean, I could do things here, but whatever. This the act of making, the act of crafting, something I posted on Patreon recently about map making, that map making and spatializing and thinking used to be literally the etymology of the word map is kind of mappa, napkin, something that's crumbled in your pocket, something that wipes the food off of your face. And then also something that you indent or imprint and carve, right? Cartography, carving with the hands, crafting with the hands, shaping something, right? This directed action is not just a mental action, it's an action of our whole being, right? It's an act of poesis. It's an act of making with the community in our relationships and our gut and our own will and intention and volition and thought. So yeah, I just love that whole kind of summing up there right at the end of the book, actually, all of these dimensions of our being that themselves are in interrelationship and living interrelationship. So I don't know where I'm going with that other than really appreciating it and loving the final act is directedness and having our hands as that work. Maybe one final point is something I've probably mentioned to you, Dare, that Byung-Chul Han says about that we need to resist something, ironically, things being ready at hand, as Heidegger talks about in Heidegger's talking about objects and things, right? Like the light switch turns off the light. When we hesitate, the hand acquires a vastness, as Byung-Chul Han says, right? When we resist just making a thing for us to do a certain presumptive course of action, when we resist that, then the thing becomes present, right? Its thou-ness, its sentience becomes present. And that's when the relationship, right, the context can actually intelligently inform us about what that relationship is, rather than imposing. I mean, I guess the idea would be taking a piece of wood and making it the shape that you want, rather than being in relationship with that piece of wood and the tree that it came from. What being wants to emerge out of that piece of wood, right? So there's this directedness with the hands, which is both a making and a shaping, but also a making with and a hesitating and a listening and acquiring a vastness. And we're not so good at that last part. So anyway, yeah. It's good stuff. I love Tyson's book. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm also just like, tagging that, like, it's so interesting how things weave together. We're doing this book club and Nora's got this, we're all doing the things at the same time. Like these threads are weaving together and they're informing each other in ways that are unknown and unknowable. And there's just so much, there's always just so much here that we could mine forever, in a sense, because there's a vastness to, like, there's a vastness to the informational context that is coming through, right? There's and when we hesitate and sink, like Larissa was saying, the hesitation isn't necessarily paralysis. The hesitation might be sort of like a relaxation, like hesitation has such a connotation in the West, because the West is like, don't hesitate, be a man, just do the thing. And it's like, I think we're recognizing now the limits of that, that cultural metaphor, right? Like Tyson talks about shaping cultural metaphors, but I think what's happening here is recognizing the limits of certain cultural metaphors, reaching like their sort of, event horizon, if you will, like the threshold limit of their relationships with others, right? It's like, oh, right, the hesitate, relax, dance, rather than impose your will upon the world, which is what the Western sort of project has been about, right? Imposing a sort of manifest destiny or the right of kings upon the land or the people or whatever. And the land being the people. In many indigenous, cultures, land and people are the same. Like there's actually the cultural metaphor is that, like there's like the land is the people and the people is the land. And, in the West, we haven't really been seeped in that cultural metaphor. And so we're sort of missing out on what that could actually feel like, I think. Like to be that indebted, but that it's not even debt, it's just interwoven, you know, to be that mycelial, you know, together with place and with culture and with community, and, you know, all of the likes and dislikes that come with that too, because clearly, you know, it's not easy to be that interwoven either, right? Like it's not easy to be this disconnected, and it's not that easy to be that connected, right? So I think no matter which way we look at it, you know, there's a difficulty in there's just that spiritual difficulty that's gonna occur. Like you know, there's no sort of easier way, I don't think, but there are ways that return the sovereignty to the universe or something, to return the animacy to everybody all over here, everybody. Wow. So we're coming up on the beautiful ending of this particular episode of this book club. And I love the way we did this book club. It was just very much a fractal hologram conversation yarn. I want to open it up for anyone who maybe wants to say anything in closing. Yeah, let me just do that. Let me open that door, and of course, raise your hand, and we'll do that thing. Even if it's just a reflection on what you gained or are really going to chew on from just this conversation, you know, like the book is sort of, you know, the book is sort of distributed at this point, I think. Yeah, Shante. Yeah.
The phrase custodial species has been kind of echoing for a while for me. And this conversation was helpful in linking a piece around what it looks like if that's not directive or not needing to do something but listening and responding. And then there's another piece that's just kind of been of the circle and the dot, or some of those diagrams that are kind of the fractal ripples of thinking about that the smallest reduction of self is also a system. And then the third and last thing was I started reading this book recently called The Extended Mind, Thinking Outside the Brain. And it's super kind of Western psychology. But what was fascinating is that Tyson is drawing on like lineage and tradition and listening to do exactly those same things. And there's something in that space that's very interesting around what opens up when there are all of these other channels of communication outside of the mind. What it means to think with so many other forms, both within the body and outside of the body.
Yeah, I'll just say, so part of the desire for the weather to change here in Florida has been me to have the freedom to go camping again. And part of this has been a kind of a desire to enter an altered state in relationship with very, very quiet places where there aren't a lot of people, but there are a lot of other beings, and staying there for a few days and just being completely immersed in a totally different language, like the language for mourning, the language for a thunderstorm, the snuffling of the anteaters that are going around, the armadillos in the evening. There's this kind of ebb and flow of different relations that I've just absolutely have loved and relaxed into in this period of suburbanized atomization lockdown that I've really enjoyed. So that the sense of, it's interesting that this is even hitting Western thinking, just in terms of, oh yeah, cognition is actually really distributed and extended, and we have kind of Western science, neuroscientific ways of talking about this, right? That slime molds actually can solve puzzles that we thought only rats could do, or like a certain type of crustacean can figure it out. I mean, there's that kind of narrative, right? But I think the more participatory felt sense aspect of that narrative is this decentering of the human and decentering of the head, actually, into the pluralized body of our interrelationships. And this is just, I mean, it's great that Western science is coming around to it, but it's not necessarily news to other life ways. But still, it's great. And I would say, like, you know, in my work with Gebster, that's certainly an encouraging development amongst Western thinking, that this sort of decentering of the human is starting to take place even in places where the human is still highly privileged and centered as this sort of arbiter of episteme and knowledge making, etc. Interesting contradictions, interesting unbearable awkwardness that is even happening there in academia. We'll see where that goes, you know.
Keith, yeah, bring us home a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I just had to riff a little bit on the unbearable awkwardness comment, because I feel like that's where we're all at as individuals and as humanity and as people trying to make our way through a pandemic and the vast changes that global warming is forcing upon us, which we forced upon it, and just the whole lack of knowing about what's going to happen next. And here in the West, we always want to know what's going to happen next, and not only know, but have an impact on it and control of it, and, you know, a button that we can push to implement it. So to try to step out of that and to step into relationship on an equal footing with all of life and with all of being and with the universe itself is super awkward, because we don't have a context for that. Our ancestors in culture have destroyed that context, and we're sitting here in the dark feeling it out again. And at the same time, it's awkward. It's also beautiful, because when you feel a little piece of it, your soul says, oh, that's it. Like Larissa was saying earlier, that's it, and that's it. And we don't know what it is, but we feel it, and we love it, and we want more of it, and we're shit-faced afraid of it, all at the same time. So yeah, awkward.
I think that's as good a place to end as any place to end today's session. Thank you all so much for listening. There will be one more coup de grace in 2 weeks, where we will sort of figure out what that even means in the context of all that we've been chatting about. Jeremy and Larissa, anything that you'd like to add in sort of seeding or preparation for number 4, or anything you want to say at all, just to say goodbye today?
see you then. I'm excited. It feels good. This feels I don't know, like a ripening of the previous conversations. There's a fermentation. I'm enjoying that space. So yeah, anticipating the next one.
I'm also looking forward to the next one, the last one maybe. And I want to do a little bit of spell casting and say that, at least for me, all these questions that we have about both how to navigate the unbearable awkwardness, but also how to do this like listening and following, how to sit down with your housemates, how to sit down with your family, how to be in how to do what we can as a custodial species given everybody's specific context and limitations. I am like praying all the time for ways to get to experiment and play with a lot of those options inside of Animist Arts as a thing, but not just Animist Arts, like hopefully with other organizations or other things that people are weaving. So that's me just being like, hey, bring it in. Thanks so much, everybody.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now.